Welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and go over the week's events in the world of Scientology as reported on Tony's Substack. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
I'm back, and we have a little news for our viewers, right, Chris?
We do. We will be changing the schedule. We're going to be flipping the script here. And what we're going to be doing is, due to our own schedules, we're resorting things. So we will be recording our shows on Fridays, and we'll do them as a weekly sort of end of week wrap up show, which is, not really going to change the format too much, but it will change the time where the show will drop on Saturdays. So you will find it here on my channel Saturdays. I'll drop it at noon. And that will be the new time. And that's starting this next week. So next week, you will not see it on Monday. You will see our show on Saturday. Okay, so that all being said, let's get into the week, huh? First story was an interesting thing happening in Clearwater, Scientology, this Clearwater Cleveland Avenue video. What is this?
Well, we've been talking about these issues in Clearwater where Dave wants them to turn over a street to him to complete the project for the new L. Ron Hubbard Hall. And part of the contention is that he has been so slow developing these other properties in town that the city hall wants to see improved. And why should the city give Dave what he wants when he's been dragging his feet on these properties on Cleveland Street? Well, I don't think it's an accident that this week they decided to host a showing at the Fort Harrison Hotel of a film about their plans for Cleveland Street. I think they're trying to convince people that, hey, they're bringing their part of this whole mix to reviving downtown. And it's a very slick video. You can actually pull it up yourself on Scientology TV and watch it. And it's a very slick video about how they, of course, it's David Miscavige, and he's got endless tax exempt parishioner money. So they're paying these, architects to restore these buildings on Cleveland Street to a 1920s, original flavor. They're tearing down walls and reinforcing things and just incredible expenses to create this, this Clearwater that nobody remembers. I think that's the part that's kind of, yeah, look, 1920s style is cool. I'll give you that. And it would probably be a real nice place if you were a professional, you were a lawyer or you were a doctor or something, to have an office in a building that had been restored to the 20s, architecture, 20s, amenities and stuff, fixtures and stuff. Sure, that might be nice, but I just think it's funny that, because it's Miscavige, everything's got to be so over the top, and of course that slows everything down. And that was the point when I showed this to Mark Bunker and said, "What do you think about them showing this now this week?" And he was saying, "Look, sure, Miscavige has all these fancy plans, but they take forever." And in the meantime, and he showed me that the new city hall that the city's putting up is going up real fast. The people, the leaders of Clearwater want change, and they want it now. And Miscavige has been in the way. So I don't know. It's interesting to see this vision that Miscavige has. And I had this thought, Chris. I don't know what you thought about this, but there's a couple things about trying to restore Clearwater, a street in Clearwater, to how it was in the 20s. First of all, is David Miscavige trying to create a street that L. Ron Hubbard will feel comfortable on when he comes back? And second of all, there's something else about 1920s Florida. It was, it was a segregated time. So
yes, it was.
It's interesting that he's trying to evoke an era that's no longer there and that people really aren't celebrating. But it's a minor point, really. I think the important thing is, what is the city council going to do about this? This request he has for the street. But in the meantime, he's got all these plans.
Fair enough, absolutely, and those are good questions you asked. Actually, that Hubbard thing is an interesting point. Actually, the 1920s thing, and then again, it could just be a stylistic thing or whatever. But Bunker also said something else on a slightly separate aspect of this, which is the view from inside Scientology about this. And,
Oh, right.
and he was quoted in your article as saying, seems to me that this public campaign is aimed expressly at public Scientologists to pump them up over the how amazingly Miscavige is using their donations to show the WOG world, as they say in Scientology, that Scientology alone can fix downtown Clearwater. It also creates evidence for the state attorney's office that shows Scientology is sincerely trying to be a good neighbor, and City Hall should accept that Miscavige has Clearwater's best interests at heart. I thought those were good points Bunker made. And in fact, the point I wanted to make is this is actually this entire activity that you're writing this very interesting and funny piece on is probably a program target. There's probably a written program that the Office of Special Affairs has, target by target, bit by bit, to get and keep the Scientology public fully on board in their bubble world headspace that Scientology has Clearwater's best interests at heart, and it's the Clearwater City Council who's off the rails and is trying to enter all the stops and barriers. And remember, we're talking Clearwater public who are amongst the more wealthy Scientologists, more well-to-do, celebrity VIP Scientologists. This is the bubble world creation. And I thought I'd comment on this is how it's done. It's stupid, simple, easy stuff like this. Show videos, get an event, get people to it. It's a small thing, but it's one step in a larger program of actions that the church engages in. And they do it. I just wanted to point out the premeditated, calculated way it's done to keep people in that headspace that they propagandize to their existing Scientologists, actually, in a lot of ways, harder than they propagandize to the outside world.
That's a great point. That's a great
interesting. Okay, now moving on, there was another interesting article, a little historical, having to do with Hubbard. Hubbard's story with Sarah being told from a newspaper article at the time it was happening, and man, was it an interesting microscope into, the 1950s or late 1940s.
It was 1946, actually. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written about this story before. And I think I've actually excerpted it before. But the reason it caught my eye again this time was that this researcher who helps me out by diving through these newspaper archives found the original, which still had all the original art. And I hadn't seen all those photos before. So the situation is that in 1946, in June, L. Ron Hubbard had been living with Jack Parsons and had taken away his girlfriend, Sarah Elizabeth Northrup, who they call Betty. So Ron and Betty had become a couple. And so after Ron had done his occult stuff with Jack Parsons and they'd done their Moonchild crazy stuff, they came up with this scheme. They were going to raise some money, go to Florida, buy a sailboat, sail it back to LA, and sell it for a profit.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ron and Betty headed to Florida with this money they raised. Although the problem was, it was almost all Jack's money. And
like $10,000 or something of Jack's money.
It was a significant amount. Well, it was enough to buy a boat, right?
Yeah.
So Ron and Betty in Miami buy this boat. This reporter at the Miami Daily News hears that L. Ron Hubbard from Astounding Magazine is in town, right? That's enough for a story in 1946, okay? So he goes down there to interview Ron and Mrs. Hubbard. They weren't actually married yet at that point. And talks to him about the boat. And Ron just spins these yarns about how, he's not about to tell him what's really going on, right? Which is that he and Betty were running away with Jack's money. But instead that they were going to go to the Caribbean and search for Henry Morgan's grave and do these other things about pirate legends. And of course, the reporter just ate it up. And anyway, so I loved the photos, though, showing the two of them preparing for their sailing adventure and repairing sails and all that. It's just really fun to see the two of them like that. And then also why it's important. The reason that I first heard about this article was from Lawrence Wright's researcher, Lauren Wolf. She's great. And she had contacted me and said that, at one point while they were researching the book Going Clear, she had gone through Scientology's, there was that Ron, the encyclopedia, and they have all these different volumes. And one of the volumes is called Master Mariner, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And it's all about Ron and it being a sailor and all that. And this article is reproduced in that Scientology publication, except that there's no sign of Betty. And Lauren knew enough to know that, wait, June 1946, they're together. So she went and hunted down this original story and saw that, yeah, Betty's in the photos. And she sent me them to show that they had literally airbrushed Betty out of the photos for the Ron encyclopedia. Like I said, I saw that some time ago, but I hadn't seen the other photos. I hadn't seen the rest of them with them stocking the boat and getting the sextant ready, and they really worked this reporter. It's hilarious. So then, after that story came out in June 1946, Jack sued them because Jack realized what was really going on. They had just bought a boat and were living high on his money, and he sued them. There was a settlement. They sold the boat, and Ron and Betty ended up in Maryland, and that's where they got married in 1946. And for Ron, it was a bigamous marriage. He had not yet divorced his first wife, Polly. So all of that was a little bit in the future after the story. So a really interesting nexus point because it's in Maryland that he starts, I think he claims he starts doing his research for what ends up being Dianetics. And by that time, they're in New Jersey together and they have their baby, Alexis. So this moment in Miami is an interesting moment to have an actual newspaper reporter talking to Ron and Betty. Fun stuff.
Absolutely. I was very blown away by these photos. Awesome stuff. And it went right along with just a few weeks ago, a documentary that I saw on YouTube, which I'll post a link to, about Jack Parsons' life. And it was a very extensive 2-hour long documentary with photos I had never seen, and where L. Ron Hubbard's a side character. He comes in at a certain point and goes out, right? But this whole episode is very prominently featured, and it's exactly as you write, and exactly showing this whole thing. I just had a couple comments. One, fact checking then, fact checking now. I don't know. I guess this just doesn't exist anymore.
Well, it was tougher then. There was no internet, Chris.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, and spitting some tails, man. Talk about underplaying. Hubbard is just going on at a mad rate about pirates, and we're going to go dig up treasure. And again with the pirate treasure. I mean, here it is again with this guy. He's constantly talking about how he's going to go dig up treasure. And I wondered at the date, and I wondered if you know this, June 30th, 1946. That year, earlier that year is the previous December, I believe, is when Hubbard shows up at Parsons' place
Right.
at his doorstep and stays with him there. And 6 months later, he's got his girl, he's got $10,000, and he's getting this boat, and they're going to flip it, but not really. Here he is going off to do pirate treasure. Do you think it's possible that Jack could have heard about this article? I don't think he would have seen it all the way out in California, but I wonder if he heard about it as the reason why he physically hightailed it out to Florida to stop Hubbard before he could get away.
You know what? That is very good. That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that question. It could be. I mean, that's the thing about before the internet is a newspaper article like that may not have gotten any farther than parts of Florida.
Exactly. In Miami Daily News, I mean, this wasn't going to be seen in Los Angeles the next day, but could somebody have called Jack, hey, or vice versa? Jack was desperately looking for, hey, where's Sarah? Where's Hubbard? What's going on? And I got to just comment real fast on this because it's just part of the story. it's always struck me as the best coincidence I have ever heard of when it comes to this magic stuff. And that is that Parsons not only goes out to confront Hubbard out in Florida and tracks him down, but before he can get hands on him, Hubbard takes off with the boat and Sarah,
Right.
and they sail off into the bay. Parsons casts a spell,
Yes.
and a storm comes up
Storm
at the
blows them
same
back into
time.
the.
And Hubbard had to come back. And that's when Jack got him. And I always thought that was one of the funniest
Yes.
things, about the whole Hubbard
That's right.
Parsons story was that incident. So anyway, great article on this and great look at this. Now, here's another weird one. This was an article you wrote concerning kids, the genetic entity, and the book History of Man.
You
Take it
know,
away.
well, I've dealt with a history man over the years, had a lot of fun. At one point, PZ Myers did me a big favor and read it, and we got to talk to him about it for the Underground Bunker. History of Man is such a wacky book, and for some reason, I was just looking through the other day and noticed the section where he talks about prenatal engrams, and I remember thinking, "Oh, that's right. This is a problem." In 1952, this was a problem for him. And so I just thought I would write that. I'm hearing from quite a few people, ex Scientologists, who are telling me this helps them. I think this is one of, 99.9% of the time, I'm learning from Scientologists, ex Scientologists about Scientology. But once in a long time, it helps to be an outsider. And I can kind of see what Hubbard was doing in a way that maybe it was hard from the inside looking out. It's very clear to me what happened here. And that is in 1950, Hubbard comes out with Dianetics. Why was that book such a hit? Why was it a bestseller? What were people hoping to get out of it? Well, if you read Dianetics, what he's telling people is that if you can just remember what happened while you were a fetus in your mother's womb, you will remember that she and dad got randy one night and had some real rough sex, and dad poked you, and I mean, he literally uses that example, and knocks you out, and then he's screaming something, and then that gets stored in your reactive mind. He was really obsessed with, first of all, he said the most important engrams, that were called basic, the most important engrams occurred when you were either a zygote, a barely, 2 days after conception, zygote, a fetus, or, during birth, or shortly thereafter, very early part of your life. So if you could just go back and remember what mom was up to, and also Hubbard had this weird fixation that everyone had survived like 10 abortion attempts. I don't know where he got this idea. But if you could just remember the crazy things that had happened to you before you were born, this would help you erase those engrams, erase your reactive mind, and we would approach being clear. And so that's what these early Hubbard clubs and Dianetic centers were doing. Were helping people try to remember what had gone on while you were a fetus and what these prenatal engrams. Well, I'm sorry, it's all absolutely ludicrous. But for 6 months or so, it made him a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Then came 1951. 1951 was a total disaster for him. The Dianetic centers went bankrupt. Betty not only divorced him, but went public with his abuse of her. Huge bad press. At one point he absconded to Cuba with their baby. I mean, just 1950. It's amazing that there was anything after 1951. But he came back, and in 1952 gradually started putting things back together, and decided to make another attempt at this movement he'd started. But he couldn't use the word Dianetics. It was in bankruptcy. So he came up with his other word, Scientology. And now the people that were following him, they didn't want to go back to the womb. They wanted to go back farther. They wanted to go back previous lives. And Hubbard went with them. He's always, of course, John Atack warns me. He says, this was Hubbard's idea, but he likes to pretend that that his followers were dragging him there. Well, however it happened, Dianetics was about what happened to you in the womb in this lifetime. Scientology was about what happened to you in previous lives, thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, other planets, crazy stuff. That's wild. And now he came up with this idea that, well, what connected all those lifetimes is that you are a thetan. You are this thing that has no physical size or mass, and you jump from one lifetime to another by jumping into a body. And he literally proposed that once the body you're in wears out and you die, that you as the Thetan then go into the nearest. Well, there's a between lives thing that I'm not going to get into right now. But then eventually you go to a maternity ward, select a baby, and jump inside and start your next life.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. That's a wonderful fantasy story. That's hilarious. It's great. Wonderful. What's the problem? Well, there's a problem. If you jump into a newborn in the hospital, then those prenatal engrams are not yours. What happened in the womb has nothing to do with you.
That's right.
Oh, now he's got a little continuity problem here because he doesn't want to stop selling Dianetics. That's his bread and butter. Dianetics is proposing that what happened to the womb is the most important thing that formed who you are. Scientology is saying, no, it's what happened to you on other planets millions and billions of years ago. How does he reconcile it? He comes up with a kludge. He comes up with a workaround. He calls it the genetic entity. He says that the fetus has this thing already in it. It's sort of this like proto-Thetan. It's not really a Thetan. That's sort of running the fetus. And then when you jump in, you take over. And it makes no sense. It doesn't. It's clearly just him trying to compensate for the fact that his two stories don't match. But it became a part of Scientology to this day. So I don't know. I thought it was really interesting when I was looking through A History of Man to see him deal with that, where he's talking about prenatal memories, he talks about not only when the Thetan jumps into the baby, but you're probably gonna have to fight another Thetan for that baby. Which, as I said, the story is great science fiction. I mean, that's fine. It's okay. But it's that anybody ever took any of this seriously, Chris. Oh my God.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I this is where I get to have egg on my face and get all embarrassed and red because, yeah, I used to take this very seriously. And there were a number of lectures, especially around this time period of 1951, 1952, when Hubbard was spinning yarns about these entities and writes History of Man, talks about entities. And then this concept of this genetic entity comes up. And I will tell you that my head was so spinny on this, and I had been a course room supervisor who had been trying to educate Scientologists for years. And I watched student after student after student, like just a line of dominoes, just fall over every time the genetic entity came up because it was such a confusing concept. And no one, and I mean no one until you just suggested it, ever told me, oh, yeah, hey, guess what? The problem with the prenatals. I knew about the problem, but it just didn't occur to me that that's how Hubbard invented the solution to it, even though, yeah, that's very obvious in hindsight. What I was trying to do was understand how this worked, because yes, the exact problem you laid out. How could you have prenatals if you weren't there?
Yeah.
Well, this entity has them, and there's this body line, and Hubbard talks about these dual lines of memory and recall that you can have. He then nullified it later, by the way, by saying all of this was just an implant and you don't really have, any of this, including evolution. That's not real either. I mean, Hubbard really, just kind of was amazing in how he would nullify his own stuff. But anyway, I never ran into one Scientologist who really thought they had a grip on this GE thing. And Hubbard gave a couple lectures about it, didn't talk about it a lot. There's the last thing I could find on it when I was doing doing my deep dive on this. I mean, it's kind of, okay. In the bigger picture of Scientology, this is how many angels dance on the head of a pin. Like at the end of the day, nobody in Scientology really cares that much about this.
Yeah.
But sometimes it comes up and sometimes people get headaches and they're just like, I can't understand this. And it really gets them riled up, right? So I thought, okay, I really want to get this. So I went into this last lecture and Hubbard says it lives in the stomach, this GE, and it's like this kind of not a Thetan, but it's kind of a Thetan, and I kind of finally, for myself, I thought everybody might just kind of find this funny. I finally got in my head that this is the thing that is sort of a living intention that goes from body to body down a reproduction line that sort of is the driving force behind evolution. And that's why we have bodies that evolve, is because of this entity that lives in our stomach.
Right. There you go.
And I am so red faced right now saying stuff like that out loud. Okay. But that's how I used to think when I was in Scientology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's the kind of like head spinning stuff that you could spend if you join Scientology. You too could spend a day or two or three enmeshed in encyclopedias and biology handbooks and history books and Scientology books in a Scientology course room, trying to sort this out for yourself. Sounds like fun, right?
Yeah.
So
Sounds like a lot
good.
of fun. Sounds
Yeah.
expensive too.
Oh, yeah. And it's only going to cost you a few thousand. So, all right. Now we're going to go to our final story for this week, which is, dare I say, we're going to talk about Dave's erection in England. So, I love talking about Dave's erection. So, what do we got this week?
Well, the tent is up, and Scientology has finally sort of applied for permission for it. This is something we've been watching for weeks, ever since Alex Barnes Ross, former Scientology London staffer, started being an activist, and he led protests at the IAS the last 2 years. He's really looked into the underlying rules and regulations about this and discovered that Scientology was not submitting the proper applications for permits for their big tent that they put up every year at St. Hill Manor for their 3-day event, usually in October. And he pointed this out, and Scientology's reaction was to try to convince the Mid Sussex District Council that they didn't need to apply for a tent permit because since they put it up every year, it's essentially a permanent structure. And the council said, no, it's not. So we've been waiting to see Scientology, apply for a permit, and it's getting pretty late. I mean, the middle of October or late October, when they usually have this thing, is coming very quickly. Well, finally, this past week, we noticed, one of our readers noticed that there was an application, but it was not an application for the tent. It's an application for permitting on a whole new car park. They want to turn a couple of fields. One of the fields they want to put a permanent footing for the tent, and they want to put a new car park in another for several hundred car spaces. And they're being mindful of environmental concerns. So one of the things they want to do is they want to put in these special bricks that grass grows through. So when there's no cars there, it just looks like a field. Of course, again, David Miscavige has unlimited tax-free parishioner money to spend, so they always go really big. Well, I'm really glad Alex is looking at this stuff because I actually alerted him once my reader said something that, hey, the permit is the application's in it. So he was and Alex was traveling, so it was a little tough, but he finally had time to sit down and go through it. And so he wrote a piece for us this week where he really highlighted a lot of problems. First of all, some of this is not new. Scientology has applied for some of this in the past, and they've been rejected. And it's very clear that they seem to think that if we apply for this big thing, car park, permanent bathrooms, permanent seat, then the permission for the tent itself is just sort of like, oh yeah, it's just a detail. I think that's what they're thinking is the Scientology. Even though they won't be able to build any of that stuff until next year, they can get the tent up this year and it'll sort of be like, oh, that's just a detail.
Right.
So I don't know how the council's going to react. But in the meantime, Dave got the tent up. That's the other news we had this week is Alex sent us a photo. And yes, the tent is up. Even though, they don't have any formal permission for it. I was very fortunate because I've been talking to Jeff Levin about this whole mess. And as Jeff Levin is wont to do, he sent us a song about Dave's erection. And you got to go to TonyOrtega.substack.com. You got to hear this song. It's so fun. He's done some wonderful songs for us about Tom Cruise and Emily Armstrong and the Minkoffs and other things. And they're always, I always can't wait to see what genre. He's a professional musician, composer, and he always picks a different style. I thought, what style is he going to do for Davey and his big tent? and he picked reggae. I didn't see that coming, and it's really funny. It's very, very well done. So please go listen to this song as we all laugh about Dave Circus coming to town. I don't know, Chris. I don't know what the council is going to think about this application, about some of the problems that I did, and Alex thanked me for this. I did point out in one of my stories that I do think this council is going to pay a different kind of attention to this application because of Alex's activism. They're not just going to
Hmm.
say, "Oh, okay, whatever you want." They're going to have some reasons why they would allow this now when they didn't allow it in the past. This Saint Hill is located in a very what they call a place of outstanding beauty, and you can't just tear things down and build things. There's zoning involved, that kind of thing. So we'll see. And you found some details in there that you thought were funny as well, didn't you?
Oh my God. I mean, the whole thing is just, it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. I, the attention paid to the ecological factors was kind of hard. Oh yeah, all that stuff, and the fact that they have money to throw at those things, so they can say we're doing all the top notch things for this. So those bricks, for example, I didn't even know those things existed.
Yeah.
Like what, really? And I think you're right about the angle of, well, look, we're doing all this stuff, so the tent's just a little,
This is a
yeah, of
detail.
course, we're just doing,
Detail.
yeah, why are we talking about the tent? Like that's not a bad strategy, actually. Considering from a business or organizational government, kind of communication thing, that's a good strategy. And it would be effective in diffusing even some of the ill will, about it. Let's make this humdrum organizational again. Let's not be, incendiary. But I do think you're absolutely right also about the fact that the council knows they have eyes on them with Alex, and he's not letting up, right? He's a little pit bull. Um, so I think that's what I think. I mean, it kind of mirroring really what you said, but I just, I don't know, these guys and their tents, it's
Well,
important. This is probably,
the other detail I know you noticed that I thought you'd have fun with is that there in there was research about the background of this property. We know that Hubbard bought it from this.
oh my God, that's right. That's right. St. Hill House. Oh yes, I forgot that. That's right. Thank you for reminding me.
And
It's not a manor.
these
It's
are
not a
real
manor.
these are real definitions in England. They don't mean anything in the United States. You can call your house whatever you want to call it, but in England, these are real distinctions. And it turns out that this was Saint Hill House, and that the Maharaja who owned it before Hubbard started calling it Saint Hill Manor for no apparent reason. So that's fun.
That is totally fun because that was probably, and I'm not even kidding right now, that was probably the selling point of this property to Hubbard, is that he would have a manor and therefore could be considered royalty amongst the English countryside, right? Because if there was one thing, I mean, if there was ever one thing about Hubbard that was consistent from place to place to place, it was this arrogance that this man brought, and this idea that because he had these past life ideas that he really did, so he would drag that stuff along, I just think that is hilarious, that it's not actually a manor, because everybody in Scientology thinks that, and I did not even know it was a distinction, again, until you're reporting on it.
I
So
know. I didn't know it either until Alex pointed that out. And then
yeah.
another thing, another detail in there is that even if they do give them permission for this car park, and you have the spaces that are already there and all the new spaces they want to put in, you're still talking only 800 cars. And that's a lot. That's much more consistent with what we have always said, that the number of people in that tent is only
Yep.
about 1,500 to maybe 2,000.
Yeah.
Whereas Scientology is always claiming 6 or 7,000.
Right.
So yeah, it's again, there are revealing little things in this application that I'm glad Alex had time to go through. Interesting.
Absolutely. And given the fact that this parking lot, by the way, is only going to go to capacity once a year.
One night
There's
a year.
no other time. Most of the time, that parking lot's going to be empty. So it better look like an empty field. Otherwise, it's going to look like an empty goddamn parking lot.
That's
Just
right.
like all their ideal orgs.
Well, and he had pointed out that they had previously wanted to do that and make a typical tarmac parking lot, and the local council said no. So
Interesting.
there, I don't think this is a done deal. It's going to be interesting to see what the council thinks.
Yeah, it's hard. Predictions are a dime a dozen, obviously, but we could say let's throw this in there. This is a council that's a little like pissed now, right, at Scientology for the public spectacle of this, the needless time and money that they have to spend dealing with Scientology's nonsense, knowing Alex is on the case. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that they're not going to just rubber stamp this stuff. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll
I
see.
hope so. I hope they have some backbone. Yeah. So, all right. Now, so next week, you guys are going to be getting this, like I said, this wrap up on Saturday. We'll be reviewing the prior week. Do you have any previews of what we might be seeing this next week?
I've been working on a very important court story. I'm hoping it comes out this week. But yeah, new bat time, same bat channel. We'll see everybody next time.
Awesome. All right, guys. See you soon. And I will put a note up on the channel in the community post so you'll see the schedule announcement change there too. All right. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.